I'm here with Jeff Oldham, founder at Informed Consulting, Sharon Bryan, a partner at Informed Consulting, and Anna Torchio at Informed Consulting. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Michael.
This conversation is going to focus on the mistakes that Jeff, Sharon, Anna see digital health startups make. We're going to focus kind of on the VC aspect and then also from the actual startup standpoint. So kind of kicking off this conversation from an investor perspective, how should VCs go about differentiating their expectations from a B2C or SaaS startups? What themes kind of quickly emerge in your eyes?
You know, from an investor's perspective, 2023 is the year of show me. And what that means is that the data itself relative to the effectiveness of the product, the clinical outcomes of the product, needless to say, the benefits of the product, and last but not least, the ROI of a product. I think in the old days, you just sort of had a good idea, and people would give you, X amount of months or years for a runway to build it and what have you. And what I have seen sometimes with again, first time investors is that if they're investing in a company that doesn't have a game plan to, whether it's clinical trials or whether it's, setting up employer pilots to gather data, that's a sort of an inadvertent critical state in following sort of the 2023 show me rules. The second thing I would say is just if you've ever read authors who give advice to first-time authors, the common feedback is write what you know. I would say for investors, first-time investors, it would be invest in what you know, and invest in products in industries that you have familiarity with, and or if you're a member of a VC team that others of your team have familiarity with. Again, healthcare, crazy complex. Needless to say, there's great opportunity in healthcare, but I would say one of the biggest mistakes a VC firm and or an entrepreneur can make is to build a product and think that they can drive success outside of the existing healthcare system. The healthcare system, which exists, with health plans and PBMs and TPAs and what have you, if you're going to build an effective product, you have to think about how that product is going to fit within the existing system. You can't think, my product's so good, I don't need the system. That's just, hubris and not practical.
How about Sharon or Anna?
On the B2C, you can kind of learn as you go. So you can deploy a version 1 of a product and kind of, work out the kinks, and, you can, I think, easily pacify end consumers. On the employer space, it is much more reputational. So your first pilots will hugely impact your success, and you want those employers that you're working with to be able to speak highly of the experience. And so I would just hesitate with investors who are so quick to want to get to market that they maybe think they can work that out with the employer space. It is a very small space in that we all kind of know each other and work together. And because lots of products haven't delivered in the past, people are very apt to ask others what they think. So you don't want your first impression to not be a good one.
For solutions that may require, regulatory approval and therefore, a more significant investment, or solutions, so new in their maturation that it'd kind of nearly be impossible to realize product market fit. What is the process for kind of appropriately evaluating both TAM and demand in those instances?
It's funny. On the one hand, TAM is third grade math. It's, what industry are you selling into? How many employers are in the industry? How many employees do they serve and or their dependents times what's your product equals your TAM. But again, while, healthcare is incredibly nuanced. And so it's important that you know what product you're building to be distributed in which market. And what I mean by that is, if you are building a product for small employers in the healthcare space, well, small employers are fully insured, which means they don't bear any risk. They're part of a pool of small employers. But it also means that the majority of small employers don't buy digital health products because they expect that their health plan is offering what they need as a fully insured customer. And so if you're doing a TAM, you can't just assume all employers of all shapes and sizes. You have to know, the difference between fully insured, self-insured, who owns that decision-making process in either market. And I would say that that's critical, and it is it's a common mistake, that we find in working with new companies.
More so from the startup perspective now, though, if they're kind of looking at the TAM piece of it wrong, maybe how fatal of a misstep can that be? And is there opportunity within there to kind of course correct?
So I previously gave you an example around sort of common miscalculations of TAM that we see a lot with entrepreneurs, not understanding, for example, the nuances or the differences between small employers, large employers, fully insured, self-insured, and how they buy. I would also say another thing that folks need to be cognizant of is, particularly when you're raising for the first time, you may be calculating the TAM of a particular industry or limiting it to a particular industry when, if you either in advance of the raise or quickly thereafter the raise, if you don't work with organizations that can actually go and assess the market to validate that that's the right industry that is most prone to adopt your product early, then you could have inadvertently been doing the TAM on the wrong industry. So there's 7 or 8 different ways that a digital health company can distribute their product. One of them, as we've talked about, is health plans. The other is employers, and there's a number of others. But in raising for the first time, if you just limited your TAM to employers, and then lo and behold, when you got your product out in market, you found that employers weren't ready, and or employers really looked to their health plan to be able to manage that service, then of course your TAM is different. I mean, can it be course corrected? Yeah, it certainly can be. But this is where it all goes back to entrepreneurs working with investors and hiring people that know the market really, really well, so that I think you can overcome and adjust for these areas accordingly. And I just think without having that kind of insight, then your TAM could be wrong. There could be good news. Maybe you're selling into a bigger TAM than you originally realized. So that doesn't suck. But I would also say that just get people who have been there, done that. And I would just say very abruptly, I don't think it's this way in Silicon Valley as much as it used to be, but there used to be this old adage of, well, why would I hire people that are coming from the system that I want to disrupt? Those people don't get it, or they would have figured this problem out a long time ago. And again, it's sort of like, building a product for a government contractor and not hiring ex-government contractors as executives or investors. Selling into that market, crazy complex, very narrow focus with lots of different layers. Multiply our healthcare market times 10x. And so TAM can be fixed, but what's really difficult to fix is if you've got a board that doesn't know the space and you've hired people who don't come from the space just because your perception was, well, people already in the space are the problem and I'm the solution. You need a mix. but you definitely need people, again, who have been in the trenches and can help, grow your company.
This is a rare industry where the TAM is really going to be somewhat cyclical. So there are going to be points in time throughout the year when your TAM is completely unavailable. So if you did not previously know that and you projected potential sales, and that's going to become a pretty upsetting surprise to learn that, between the months of September and December, your target market is completely unavailable to meet with you, let alone make a purchasing decision. And there's all kinds of nuances, be it they have union populations, maybe their insurance carrier just bought a solution similar to yours. So any member of your TAM that uses that same insurance carrier, they're now out of your TAM because they already have that solution for free through their carrier. There's going to be tons of different nuances. So again, never make assumptions, always be validating and really learning about what it's going to be like to sell your product before you actually begin to sell it.
What's the approach to trying to measure solution effectiveness in the digital health space? Is it, once a solution's implemented, this is kind of purely utilization based, or are there kind of empirical outcomes that, that are looking to be met to measure that type of effectiveness?
Whether you're selling to a health plan or whether you're selling, to a large employer via a consultant or a broker, having clinical outcomes validated by third parties, and signed off on, that's crucial, because the adoption of digital health companies by large self-insured employers isn't because they think it's a good idea. The majority of the time, the internal validation for investing in a new product is because it's going to deliver return on investment. Yes, the product is out there that's managing or hoping to managing maybe one of their higher cost drivers or drivers of productivity or even presenteeism. But it's incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to ask organizations to spend 6 to 7 figures on a product if you don't have the ROI math to justify it. And so whether that's something you've got to do like right out of the gate is figure out how are you going to obtain these outcomes. Are you going to partner with another health plan to do it, and or employers, pilots, as Sharon mentioned earlier. And then I think the last thing I would say is sort of similar to our previous conversation is, yes, you've got the math, but then how do you get your product in front of the members who need to use it? So that part, is just, I think because folks think it's B2B that, well, hey, I just get, who I'm selling to get the product in their hands and I'm out. But really our world should be looked at as B2B to C, in that a lot of digital health companies now derive their fees from utilization, not per employee per month. And so what does that mean? Well, the per employee per month world, or per member per month, you're paying, X amount of money per head per month for your product. But in doing so, from an employer's perspective, you, as the digital health company, may not have any kind of incentive to drive greater engagement, and which of course leads to greater outcomes. But in a utilization model where the digital health company doesn't get paid until people use the product, and sometimes it's different levels of, okay, you interact once with the product, and then you take some form of comprehensive exam, and then from there you get into a protocol to manage your condition, so on and so forth. That part is critical. And then, because if you think about it, just to use behavioral health for example, if you know anyone that's suffered from stress or anxiety, going to a psychologist for 30 minutes doesn't solve your issue. You have to go repeatedly, and you have to be compliant, in order to manage that condition. Digital health exact same way. And so think about how you're going to distribute your product. And once members have it, how are you going to keep them coming back and using your product? Because the engagement and the utilization is what drives the clinical outcomes, which drives the ROI, which is why employers buy these products.
Great. Anything to add, Sharon?
Selling into the employer space, companies are often so focused on being the first to the market with a certain product. Your competition is always going to be status quo. That just remembering that and recognizing that it's always going to be easier to just stay with what they have, I think can help you position your product correctly.
Is there a narrow set of guardrails you believe give the company or solution a better opportunity for success? I guess from the company standpoint, right, we've kind of talked about this a little bit. Like they're probably looking at it, say, hey, I just need to get to the employer and that's going to help me reach, some critical distribution mass. Well, really, if they're now looking to say, hey, what's the actual effectiveness around these solutions? And it's maybe more, utilization based. Where do you kind of see a sweet spot in terms of, hey, I'm looking at this solution and this seems to be something that might have an actual opportunity for success?
What should folks be cognizant of relative to the guardrails? Well, the first thing is, what problem are you solving relative to the condition that your product is going to hopefully help the members improve upon their livelihood? How many existing vendors are there already in that space? There's pros and cons. If you're going into a space where there's already a number of different vendors, then on the one hand, you can say, well, hey, this shows that employers need the product. They validated, sort of the market application or the need. But then, of course, entering that market, you've got to immediately be able to differentiate yourself versus others that have been in the market for a few years. And in the digital health world, a few years is a long time. So let's say you're entering a space, where you're the first one there. Then, of course, on the one hand, that's incredibly exciting. But then on the other hand, whether you're selling to a health plan or employer, they have to justify to their leadership why they need to buy your product, because there isn't proof or empirical proof, because you're the first one there, that your product works, that members will adopt it, and there is ROI as well.
Anything to add to that, Sharon?
So often, I think startups or the boards or the VCs or whoever, everyone is focused on these large employers. So, the 50,000 life cases. And the reality is they have all the leverage, all the power. They're bombarded with solutions. They oftentimes can negotiate deals where maybe they're just so popular and everyone is calling on the same people. And I just think as you think about how to distribute your product, there's such an opportunity in that middle market space to help employers find solutions. And that's an excellent space to grow. And so just don't always go to copy what everyone else has done.
Always be validating your choices with not only yourself and your board, but with who you're going to be selling to, which is employers or brokers or health plans. Always be engaging them to make sure that there is, in fact, the appetite as you continue to make product development choices, target market choices, things like that. Don't ever make assumptions and just constantly be validating those choices.
So now that we've kind of talked about, TAM a little bit, the importance of the board, kind of approach, hey, you need to have some people who really kind of, understand the complexity around this industry and kind of how to navigate that. Let's kind of get into the solutions a little bit more specifically. So, what are factors you commonly see that maybe negatively impact the viability of a new digital health solution coming to market?
Of course, the product has to work. The product needs to be tested. Product needs to be validated. These are things that we've discussed. The people you surround yourself with, need experience. I would also say sometimes, inadvertently people surround themselves with people who are just going to say yes to them. When you do need to hire people that have maybe different perspectives, have good and applicable experience, but won't just sit there and nod their head every time the entrepreneur says something. And then there's just some fundamental things, like in our work with early stage companies, if they're coming off a seed round, for example, one of the first questions we'll ask is, okay, when you went out for the capital raise, give us a sense of how you projected, revenue the first 3 years. What expectations were set? As Anna said, if you're selling something to the large self-insured market, it's like 86% of American employers, have a January 1 effective date. So, you're going to sell a lot. You're going to sell during the summer, but Q4s and Q1s is relatively quiet. Do your investors know that? Does your sales team know that? I mean, I would say that the expectations that they're clear and transparent, and that everyone's in agreement, can also help a lot. And that's tough. I don't mean to give the impression that, hey, this is like, super easy, because, if you're doing well and you're investing and you're obtaining more capital and more rounds, that means you typically have new board members come into play. But these are just things that you always have to be cognizant of, is taking money from folks that either don't have the experience can definitely mislead to, inadvertent misexpectations that are being set, and then can obviously put an unbelievable amount of pressure on the entrepreneur and his executive staff, when all of that could have been avoided if they had transparency around expectations from the beginning. And the last thing I would say is, if I'm an entrepreneur and I'm looking at VCs, particularly first-time VCs, just as the VC is interviewing me about my product, my company, how much is it going to take to fund the company, et cetera, I would also interview the VC around, can you give me a sense of other investments you've made, before in my space? Can I talk to other CEOs that you've worked with in the past, at the seed round or Series A or what have you? So sometimes I find that because first-time entrepreneurs are so anxious to obtain money, that they don't realize that this is a dual street, and that they have every right to ask investors questions around their experience and ask for references, so to speak, just as the investors have in questioning their business plan.
How about Sharon, from your perspective, anything you'd like to add?
A lot of solutions we've looked at recently have a clinical component to it. So obviously, when you're starting off, you may not have your own clinical data. You may be using, others' data, but don't let that kind of allow you to stop trying to gather your own. And I would also really recommend that you utilize people that have experience in the space to help you understand what sort of data you want to be reporting on, because you can't really go back if you don't capture the right data, and that'll be critical to positioning your product with employers.
What do you commonly see, with some of those operational challenges that digital startups are facing, and maybe, some recommendations on how they can better navigate those?
Initial investment, heavily focused on product makes sense. And then from there, once the product is ready, investment in sales and marketing. And that's terrific. But it's the next step that I find is often skipped, or is maybe not looked upon as equally as important as the first two of product and sales and marketing. And that's how are you operationally going to support your product? So whether it's, again, a health plan or employer, and you get someone to say yes, is your team, do they know how to implement? Do they know how to work with, a variety of different players, employers, different third parties, health plan? Do you know how to manage the employer to ensure that they stay on track? Oh, by the way, how do you distribute and deliver your product? And then, when employees are calling in for questions, how are you going to manage those? I think the old adage is go sell and the rest will take care of itself. I would say with employers now, because this digital health space now is mature for all intents and purposes, that employers have a lot more prove it to me, um, and your smarter employers are going to ask as much about the operational strategy and the support as they will the product. And the rationale for that is, again, as a CHRO or a VP of benefits, if they're investing in a new product, then chances are, one, they've had to obtain some form of internal approval for budget or line item. Two, they need to deliver upon that product, and three, oh, by the way, they don't have a large team. Again, unfortunately, because of pandemic, the economy, and what have you, HR and benefits teams are getting smaller. They're not getting larger. And so you are putting a lot of faith into a company and a team that they're not going to mess up. And, there are, not to be melodramatic, but there are people who lose their jobs by writing really, really large checks to companies who can't deliver, who haven't thought out operationally how are they going to support this. So I think those are sort of the three pillars. Of course, with managing cash flow, of course, is the foundational element, but product, sales, and marketing, operations, all three of them are equally important.
Or the type of personality that is interested in starting their own company and growing this company, there's a certain skill set that's required, and it's often a different skill set than is required to manage a team. And so recognizing that if you've never managed a team before, that is a skill. I mean, giving feedback, training employees, and without it, these companies really struggle to hold on to good people and really kind of scale beyond what the founder themselves can do. So thinking about that and maybe just prioritizing that person as a hire, I think would be really beneficial for a lot of startups. Again, when you're selling to large employers, you're just like any other vendor for this large employer. So you have to go through oftentimes that procurement process. So recognizing that you're going to need all of the legal pieces, the security pieces around technology, just like any other vendor would to work with that large employer.
You, Anna?
Don't think that you're going to bypass the walk or the crawl, walk, run, sprint process. Sales are not going to solve the issues that you have or solve for the goals that you have if you aren't launching this on a smaller scale, working out the kinks, and really preparing for unexpected interruptions to deployment, and then solving for those as you go, then there's no way that the product is ever going to reach larger scale sales because you haven't solved for those unexpected nuances yet.
You guys are working with, point solution providers, some of these innovative solutions, these new digital health solutions. So what are some of the key challenges those solutions face when trying to find their way into the employer offerings?
There's a handful of them. One is, you have a lot of first-time CEOs and entrepreneurs that establish these digital health companies. I have found the majority of time because something happened to themselves or their family members that they're looking to remedy or improve upon. But they haven't worked in the healthcare industry, and so they may not understand that there are a handful of very significant nuances that they need to be aware of. The first of which is, interestingly enough, in the self-insured, large employer world, I would say the market is actually B2B2C. And what I mean by that is, if you're a digital health company and you're selling to a health plan, or you're selling to an employer, or you're selling to a government entity or what have you, that first sale, that contractual sale, is great, but you can't start, high-fiving or chest bumping until you get your product into the actual members' hands. And so I think one of the things that a lot of folks don't recognize is that, yes, of course, your product has to be terrific. It can drive ROI, can help justify, the investment. But your ability to figure out engagement and how to get your product in front of the member is crucial. I think most folks just sort of paint with a broad brush and they make the assumption of, oh, the employer can do that, right? The employer has great relationships with, all thousands of their employees. And, needless to say, unfortunately, when the economy is having its challenges, HR and benefits teams are typically the first teams to reduce staff. And so the idea that the employer can just sort of, wave a magic wand and create all this communication, it's incredibly important for these B2B companies to actually even have like a B2C skill set around when you're selling to an individual consumer. You need to have an omni-channel approach of finding them and getting the word out and making sure that your product is sent to them. I would say just a couple other things. One is, the first time entrepreneurs that we work with, I think a lot of them certainly have studied in, MBA school, the majority of them, around sort of the financials of establishing a company. But to me, I would say, like they've learned the math and the science of it. But I would say the arts and humanities piece of a company around how you interact with your employees, how do you manage them, how do you pick people, both investors and your first few hires, that can actually help you in opening doors. When you select people that don't work out, how can you pull folks aside? I find that these are challenges that most entrepreneurs, first-time entrepreneurs, will think, well, if I build a good product, that's all I need. The market will come and everything will take care of itself. And I would just say, no, you've still got to go to the market. And then secondarily, you still have to invest in, non-mathematical items to ensure that your team is performing. And then lastly, I would say the biggest challenge that we find is for first-time entrepreneurs is they've got a product, they've got a great idea, and they need funding. And so they go to the market and raise capital, and they don't question a lot around relative to what are the backgrounds and the experience of the people that are willing to help invest in my company. And in case you're asking, well, why does that matter? Healthcare is, I don't think anyone would argue, if not the complex, one of the most complex industries. And so taking investments from people that have sort of been there, done that, have either, lived as executives in health plans or for large employers, or, perhaps worked for VC firms that specialize in healthcare related distribution. That's so important that those are the people, as much as possible, that you partner with them on the investment side, because they can tell you a lot of the things that the textbooks won't tell you around how to navigate through the industry. And then lastly, I would say when entrepreneurs sort of grab the first investors they can and they don't have the background, then there's a lot of challenges relative to timing and expectations. So, if someone has never sold B2B2C and you've created a product for a health plan, then an investor may have expectations of, well, geez, you should be able to, start selling and obtaining revenue in 90 days, 120 days. That seems very reasonable. And so you inadvertently have conflict with entrepreneurs and with their investors because they have inadvertent, unrealistic expectations. And of course, that puts additional stress on the entrepreneur. And needless to say, an entrepreneur is spinning numerous plates at one time, and they need clarity at all times. So anything that to me would take away from their clarity certainly would hurt their company.
Sharon, did you have anything to add to that, or Anna?
Everything that Jeff said, I completely agree with. I think the one other piece on, we've worked with, a number of startups at this point, and it's been really interesting to see how some of the boards and the advisors have lots of contacts because they come from this industry. So I would say, as you're, if you're a founder looking for investors and board members that really can help you strategically distribute and communicate your product to the market, is a huge value add in and outside of their investment. And then on the other side is we've seen, I think it's probably typical that these founders get information and ideas from everyone on how to distribute their product. And so we've oftentimes seen where people have a good idea, but just don't stick with it long enough. So really deciding on what you're going to do, what you're going to try, and making sure that you give it enough time to be successful, because this enterprise space is complex, and it does take time for people to do it successfully. I think we often see in the headlines the people that have hit it big, but we don't ever really pay attention to the years they spent kind of building that process underground.
Anything to add there, Anna?
A lot of what we see is the development of a solution that is great for anybody. I mean, anybody would love to have a virtual dermatologist or access to telemedicine across any of their healthcare needs, which is great. But when you think about who you're initially selling to, which is the employer total rewards team, those bin admins, these entrepreneurs don't necessarily have the experience or the insight into what their day-to-day is like. What is their life like every day? What are they thinking about? What are you selling to them? Is what you're selling going to put a lot of work on their shoulders? Do you have ROI data so they don't have to come up with it on their own? How are you going to disseminate it to their employees? Is it in a channel that is existing today? Do they even have email addresses on file? What are the impacts from a data integration perspective? All of these things this is how the employer buyers are thinking. And I think the entrepreneurs don't necessarily have access into what they are really assessing, and all of the minute details that go into to them being able to approve and then pitching it to their leadership to also approve from a security, budget, legal perspective moving forward. So I would definitely encourage entrepreneurs in this space to take the time to maybe interview some total rewards professionals or bin admins, and really put yourself in their shoes, and that'll help you be a much stronger seller in this space.
Great. Well, we've reached the end of our discussion here, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for everybody's time.